Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our latest stories. It began on a dusky Roman evening, where golden light draped over crumbling cathedrals and cobbled streets hummed with ancient secrets. Clara, elegant and reserved, stood beside her husband Daniel at a diplomatic reception, an event filled with tuxedos, clinking glasses, and meaningless pleasantries. 12 years of marriage had refined her into the perfect politician's wife, gracious, composed, and quietly invisible. She sipped her wine, listening to Daniel charm ambassadors with the ease of a man who had long forgotten how to look at her. And then, Omar appeared. Tall, sharp-suited, and unmistakably magnetic, he strode through the crowd with a presence that bent the air. Daniel's son from a previous marriage, now a man, no longer the awkward boy Clara remembered. His eyes found her across the room, and in that moment, the noise of the party faded. Something shifted. Clara's breath hitched, not from recognition, but from the way he looked at her. It wasn't familial. It wasn't polite. It was intense, searching, almost dangerous. She told herself it was nothing. A fluke. But later, when she caught him watching her again, that same fire in his eyes, Clara felt something stir deep within her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Something she wasn't ready for. The days that followed passed in a strange, slow blur. Clara returned to her routine beside Daniel, dinners filled with political updates and diplomatic pleasantries, evenings marked by quiet silences and empty gestures. On paper, they looked like the perfect couple. But inside, Clara felt like a ghost drifting through a life too polished to touch. And then came the invitation. Daniel had to return to Brussels for 2 days of urgent meetings, and he insisted Clara stay behind in Rome, saying she deserved a break. It was meant to be relaxing, days filled with art galleries, café terraces, and long walks. Instead, it was suffocating. Clara wandered the streets with a heaviness in her chest, unable to shake the look in Omar's eyes from that night. He was staying at a nearby villa, coordinating a side project for Daniel's campaign, and when she ran into him outside a gelato shop, it didn't feel like a coincidence. He smiled, warm and knowing. "Rome suits you," he said, his voice like velvet over something smoldering. She tried to laugh it off, but it caught in her throat. They talked, about books, about travel, about how Rome felt like it was holding its breath. And Clara, for the first time in years, laughed. Really laughed. Not for appearance, not for company, but from somewhere buried deep. As they parted ways that afternoon, Omar's fingers brushed hers in the subtlest of touches. It was brief. Intentional. And it set off something inside her that she couldn't ignore anymore. Clara didn't mean to see him again. That's what she kept telling herself. But as the days in Rome stretched on, the city seemed to press into her, whispering things she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. When Omar texted her, just a simple, "Walk with me," she didn't hesitate. They met on a quiet street just before dusk, where the golden light spilled across the cobblestones like something out of a dream. He greeted her with a smile that disarmed her completely, the kind that wasn't demanding, but inviting, tender, and dangerously familiar. As they strolled along the Tiber River, Clara opened up in ways she hadn't in years. She told him about the silence in her marriage, the way Daniel always made room for ambition but never for her. Omar listened, not like someone collecting stories, but like someone who saw her slipping through the cracks and wanted to catch her before she disappeared. They stopped near an old stone bridge, the fading sun casting a halo over the water. She turned toward him, words lodged in her throat. "This isn't right," she whispered. "I know," he said. But he didn't step away. His hand brushed her arm, lingering just long enough to send a tremor through her bones. There, in the quiet space between guilt and gravity, Clara felt the line she'd sworn never to cross blur into something almost beautiful. Something she didn't have the strength, or the desire, to walk away from. Not tonight. Not yet. Clara returned to the hotel that night feeling both exhilarated and ashamed. The cobblestone streets of Rome had never felt more alive, nor more dangerous. Her heart was still racing from that final moment by the bridge, from the way Omar had looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. She hadn't kissed him, but something inside her already had. Back in her room, she stood by the window, staring out at the glowing skyline, struggling to breathe through the tide of conflicting emotions. She told herself nothing happened. Not really. But the ache in her chest said otherwise. And then her phone buzzed. "I can't stop thinking about you." It was him. The message was simple, but it unraveled her carefully tied resolve. She didn't respond, not immediately. She needed to think. Daniel had called her earlier, his voice warm, asking about the conference, asking if she was eating well. She had smiled and answered all the right things, weaving her betrayal into the background noise of her marriage. That was the part that scared her most, not the kiss that hadn't happened, but the lies she was already comfortable telling. She wanted to believe she still knew who she was, but every time Omar entered the picture, her reflection seemed to shift. Clara couldn't tell anymore if she was falling for him, or simply trying to remember who she had once been before life with Daniel had swallowed her whole. The line between desire and escape was blurring. The following morning, Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains, but there was no warmth in her chest, only a heaviness that pressed deep into her bones. She had spent the night tossing and turning, haunted by the ghost of a kiss that never came, by the memory of Omar's voice brushing too close to her ear. As she dressed for the second day of the summit, her reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, poised, composed, hiding the storm behind her eyes. She told herself to forget him, to focus on the work that had brought her to Rome, to remember the promises she had made to Daniel. But as she stepped into the sleek hotel conference hall, there he was, Omar, already seated, already watching. Their eyes met across the room, and the breath left her body. There was a challenge in his gaze, a silent question that made her skin flush beneath her blouse. He looked like temptation incarnate, calm, confident, and completely unrepentant. And worst of all, he looked like he knew exactly what he was doing to her. During the break, he approached casually, handing her a coffee without a word, his fingers lingering on hers just a second too long. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. The air between them was charged, thick with the tension of something forbidden. "Clara," he murmured, voice low and deliberate, "you don't have to pretend with me." And for one terrifying, exhilarating second, she didn't want to. It happened on a rainy afternoon, one of those quiet, gray moments when time seems to slow, and the world feels like it's waiting for a decision you haven't yet made. Clara had told herself 100 times she wouldn't meet him again. She had rehearsed every excuse, planned every detour. But somehow, her feet carried her to that small tucked-away café just off the Piazza Venezia, and there he was, Omar, seated near the window, his coat damp from the drizzle, his eyes already on her as if he'd known she would come. She told herself it was just coffee. Nothing more. A chance to clarify boundaries, to remind herself of who she was. But the moment she sat down, all resolve melted beneath the heat of his gaze. They talked, about books, about art, about Rome itself, and yet none of it mattered, not really. What mattered was the way her heart sped up when he leaned closer, the way his hand brushed hers as if by accident. She laughed more freely with him than she had in years. She felt seen, alive, and it terrified her. Somewhere between the second cappuccino and the silence that followed one of his offhand compliments, Omar reached out and touched her cheek, a feather-light graze that shattered the last of her self-control. Clara didn't stop him. She didn't speak. She just closed her eyes, letting herself feel, if only for a moment, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, wanted. Not as a wife. Not as a mother. But as a woman. The moment Clara returned home that evening, the air in their apartment felt heavier, thicker, like it knew what she had done. Daniel was already there, seated at the dining table, still in his suit, tapping away at his laptop as if everything in their world was still intact. She stood by the door for a long second, watching him, his furrowed brow, the faint twitch in his jaw, the quiet sighs he let out between emails. Once she had loved that about him, his focus, his determination. But now, it only reminded her of how easily he could disappear behind that screen. "You're home late," he said without looking up. The words weren't suspicious, just a statement. That made it worse. Clara forced a smile and mumbled something about traffic. She moved through the evening on autopilot, reheating leftovers, folding laundry, laughing too loud at his dull recount of a boardroom mishap, anything to hide the chaos roaring inside her. But as the night wore on, the guilt crept in, tightening around her throat. She had kissed Omar. More than once. Her mind replayed every second. His hand at the nape of her neck, the way their lips met like magnets finding their charge, the whispered words she shouldn't have let herself hear. "You deserve more," he had said, and for a split second, she believed him. Now, sitting across from Daniel, she wondered how long she could keep living like this, torn between the comfort of loyalty and the ache of desire. And the terrifying truth? She wasn't ready to choose. Not yet. Clara thought the guilt would fade. That if she buried herself in routine, laundry folded just right, dinner warm by 7, kisses on the cheek instead of the lips, it would all somehow disappear. But the guilt didn't fade. It lingered, thick and sour, crawling into her skin with every lie she told. Each time she glanced at Daniel and saw the trust still flickering in his eyes, it gutted her. He didn't know, not yet. And that made it worse. Because while she kept pretending, he kept loving. Quietly. Consistently. Like he always had. And yet, even as Clara clung to the familiar rhythm of their marriage, her mind betrayed her. She'd pass the mirror and catch a glimpse of the woman Omar had looked at like a flame, something fierce, untamed. She missed that version of herself, the one who felt seen, wanted, alive. And whenever her phone buzzed, her heart skipped. Even without a name on the screen, she knew it could be him. Then came the evening Daniel surprised her. He booked them a weekend getaway to the coast. "We need this," he said gently, and Clara's heart cracked. Because he was trying. And she was still lying. As they packed their bags, her hands trembled over her folded sweaters. Omar had messaged her again, just hours earlier. "Are you happy?" She wanted to scream. No. She wasn't happy. But she didn't know what would make her happy anymore, Daniel's safe embrace or Omar's dangerous kiss. And as the suitcase zipped shut, so did her certainty. The seaside breeze should have soothed her, but Clara couldn't escape the churning inside her. The inn Daniel had chosen was charming, with whitewashed walls and curtains that fluttered like whispers. He was doing everything right, gentle touches, thoughtful glances, quiet attempts at reconnection, but Clara couldn't meet his warmth without feeling like a fraud. Every time he reached for her hand, she felt the phantom weight of Omar's fingers instead. Every kiss Daniel placed on her temple reminded her of the night she crossed the line. That kiss. That fire. That breathless moment under foreign stars. She tried, she really did. They walked along the beach, laughed over shared plates of seafood, and stayed up late with wine and old stories. But even in those fleeting moments of comfort, Clara felt fractured. Daniel didn't press her, he was patient. Too patient. And that only deepened the ache. Because he didn't know the truth. Not yet. But she knew he sensed something missing behind her smile, something distant in her touch. On their last night, Daniel pulled her close, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you here with me, Clara? Really here?" The question landed like a stone in her chest. Her eyes burned. Her lips trembled with 1,000 unspoken things. She nodded, but she couldn't meet his gaze. Because part of her heart was still caught somewhere else, in a memory, in a moment, in Omar's arms. And as Daniel held her beneath the moonlight, Clara wondered if love was enough to drown a secret this deep. The flight home was quiet, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted beyond repair. Daniel sat beside her, eyes closed, headphones on, as if sleep might silence what lingered between them. But Clara's mind was loud. The moment they returned, routine resumed with mechanical precision, laundry, emails, meetings. But nothing felt the same. Their house, once filled with cozy silences and the scent of morning coffee, now echoed with something colder. Daniel wasn't cold, exactly. He was just not there, not fully. His eyes skimmed past her at dinner, his hands no longer reached for hers in the dark. One evening, as Clara was folding laundry, she noticed Daniel's suitcase tucked behind the bedroom door, still packed. He hadn't unpacked since the trip. She stood there staring, her heart pounding. It was symbolic, she realized. He hadn't really come home. Not emotionally. Not to her. Later that night, she found him on the back porch, staring into the dark. "Is there something you're not telling me?" he asked, voice low and calm. Clara froze. Her fingers curled against the frame of the sliding door. "Like what?" she whispered, but the tremble in her voice gave her away. Daniel turned to her, his eyes too quiet, too still. "I'm not accusing you, Clara. I'm just asking for the truth." And in that moment Clara knew, the choice she made in Paris hadn't ended there. It had followed her home, curled itself into their bed, into their silence. And now, it was demanding to be spoken. Clara sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea she had forgotten to drink. Across from her, Daniel read over some documents, his glasses slipping down his nose, the soft lamplight casting shadows across his tired face. There was a time she found comfort in the quiet, the gentle cadence of domestic life, the predictability of evenings like this. But now, silence felt like a punishment. Every moment between them was tight with unspoken things, stretching like a wire about to snap. It had been weeks since Paris. Weeks since Clara had confessed everything, well, almost everything. She had told Daniel about Omar, about the blurred boundaries, about the kiss. But not about how deeply she had let herself feel. Not about how a part of her still played those moments back in her mind like a song she couldn't stop humming. Daniel had stayed, but he hadn't come back. Not completely. And then came the letter. Clara found it in the mailbox, no return address, the handwriting unmistakable. Omar. She didn't open it right away. She hid it beneath the pile of unpaid bills, terrified of what it might say. Was it a plea? A threat? A memory? That night, as Daniel turned off the lights and walked past her without a word, Clara pulled the envelope from the drawer, her fingers trembling. Secrets had a way of surviving even after confessions. And some, she feared, were still waiting to burn everything to the ground. The letter haunted Clara long before she opened it. Every time she passed the drawer where she hid it, her stomach knotted with dread. Finally, one sleepless night, she couldn't resist any longer. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper. Omar's handwriting spilled across the page in ink that looked like it had been rushed, desperate. I can't forget. You said it was a mistake, but to me, it was the only time I ever felt alive. If he can't love you the way I do, you know where to find me. Clara dropped the letter like it had burned her. The words echoed in her head long after she'd stuffed it into the trash. Omar hadn't moved on, he was waiting. Watching. Still convinced there was something between them worth clinging to. Her heart pounded with guilt and unease. Was this just lingering obsession, or a threat wrapped in longing? Daniel, still distant but present, noticed her unease. You've been somewhere else lately, he said one evening, his voice cautious. She looked at him, tears brimming. There's something I haven't told you. The moment stretched taut. And then she confessed, about the letter, about Omar's refusal to let go. Daniel didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He simply said, then you need to make a choice, Clara. For good. Her heart cracked open. She nodded, knowing that the time for secrets was over. If she wanted her marriage to survive, she'd have to burn the bridge completely, and watch it turn to ash. The final confrontation came not in chaos, but in the unsettling stillness of a quiet evening. Clara stood at the edge of the garden, twilight painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, when she heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was Omar. His presence was unmistakable, intense, watchful, a storm cloaked in calm. I told you not to come here again, she said without turning, her voice firm despite the tremble she felt deep inside. I had to see you, he replied, stepping closer. You haven't answered any of my messages. I needed to know if you meant it, if it's really over. She turned to face him, her heart racing. His eyes searched hers for something, hope maybe, or a final crack in her resolve. But Clara had none left to give. It was never real, Omar. It was a moment born out of loneliness and confusion. But I'm not that woman anymore. His jaw clenched. So this is it? It has to be, she said softly. For Daniel. For me. For all the parts of my life that still deserve to be healed. Omar's gaze hardened for a breath, then softened with reluctant understanding. Without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows one last time. Clara stood alone in the dusk, the weight of closure heavy but freeing. Her past was no longer chasing her. She had made her choice, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like peace. In today's fast-paced, emotionally demanding world, it's easy to lose yourself in the routines of life and forget to nurture the relationships that matter most. Clara's story reminds us that emotional disconnection doesn't happen overnight, it builds quietly in moments left unattended. Communication is essential. Talk openly with your partner, express your needs before resentment takes root. And if you're tempted by someone outside your relationship, pause and ask yourself why. Is it curiosity or a cry for emotional fulfillment? Don't chase fleeting excitement at the cost of lasting love. Rebuilding trust is hard, but choosing integrity always begins with honesty.